Okay, so let's dive into a story that, on the surface, just doesn't seem to make any sense. It involves three very different countries, the United States, Russia, and Bangladesh, and a really surprising exception to some of the world's tightest energy sanctions.
And the whole thing really pivots on this one number, 60. For 60 days, the United States has given Bangladesh an official pass to buy Russian fuel. Now, in the world of international politics and sanctions, that is a huge deal, and it raises one very big question.
And that's really the core question we're tackling today, right? Why on earth would the US, which is leading the charge on sanctioning Russia, turn around and give this deal the green light? To figure that out, we have to rewind a bit and see how this all got started.
To get to the bottom of this, we've got to look at the timeline, because this wasn't some sudden, out-of-the-blue decision. It was actually a very calculated, step-by-step process.
So when you look at how this all played out, you start to see a really interesting pattern. It kicked off back on March 12th with an initial 30-day waiver. But the moment that one expired on April 11th, it was immediately replaced with an even longer 60-day waiver. This tells you the US wasn't just kicking the can down the road, they were actively making this happen. So what was so important that it justified bending their own rules?
Well, the answer really boils down to the incredible pressure Bangladesh was under. The country's energy sector was in a serious bind, and that forced them to start looking for some pretty unconventional solutions.
You know, Bangladesh is in a tough spot, like a lot of developing countries right now. They're getting caught in the crossfire of all these global events. You've got instability in the Middle East, you've got broken supply chains, and all of that was creating a perfect storm that threatened to grind their economy to a halt. To put it simply, they needed a stable source of fuel, and they needed it fast.
And this really lays out the fundamental problem perfectly, doesn't it? On one side, you have Bangladesh facing a potential energy crisis, and on the other, the most obvious solution is completely blocked by tough US sanctions against Russia. So how do you thread that needle? Well, you solve it the old-fashioned way, with a whole lot of diplomacy. Trust me, this waiver didn't just appear out of thin air. It was the end result of some very deliberate, very high-level negotiations.
Yeah, this was not something that happened overnight. It all started with a formal letter from Bangladesh. From there, things moved to critical face-to-face meetings. First up was Washington on March 31st, where Bangladeshi officials met their American counterparts. And then, just 2 weeks later, the Russian ambassador was in Dhaka, talking business. This was a carefully choreographed diplomatic dance.
And this quote right here, this is the key. The US didn't just grudgingly say, okay, fine. It actually offered support. What that tells you is that from Washington's point of view, the risk of an unstable Bangladesh was a much bigger problem than the optics of making an exception to its Russia sanctions.
And get this, the conversation didn't even stop there. They started getting creative, thinking about long-term workarounds. One of the big ideas they floated was this really clever loophole. Let Bangladesh import Russian crude oil, but only after it has been refined somewhere else, in a third country. It's a fascinating idea that could become a model for how other nations navigate these kinds of sanctions.
Okay, so after all that maneuvering, what does this actually mean for Bangladesh right now? In a nutshell, it's a breather, a much-needed but very temporary sigh of relief.
And just to be super clear on what we're talking about, a sanctions waiver is basically what it says on the tin. It's an official temporary hall pass. It lets a country do something, in this case buying fuel, that would normally be a big no-no under sanctions. Think of it as a diplomatic pressure release valve.
And for Bangladesh, the immediate result is just crucial breathing room. I mean, in the middle of this completely chaotic global energy market, this 60-day window is like a shield. It creates this little bubble of stability, allowing the country to secure fuel and take some of that immense pressure off its economy.
But, and this is the big but, this is just a temporary patch. It's a Band-Aid. And that leaves us with the billion-dollar question. What happens when these 60 days are up? Finding a sustainable, long-term plan for energy security